This is Politricking
On record, Tshidi.
with Tshidi Madia on EWN.
Hello, welcome to Politricking with myself, Tshidi Madia. We are on episode 5 of season 6 of a politics podcast brought to you by Eyewitness News. So we've heard a lot of people speak about GNU, at least some people from the big parties. We've heard from some of the smaller parties. But I also want to bring in somebody who is kind of in the GNU because of political parties in the GNU, but isn't in the GNU because in Gauteng there's no such thing as a government of provincial unity. So she's outside of a GPU, but she is in the GNU. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's who I've got with me this week. I'm speaking to the national chair of Rise Mzansi. Right?
Correct, yes.
Do you know that voice? I'm speaking to Vuyiswa Ramokgopa.
Correct.
She's joining me in studio this week. I think it's a conversation that's long overdue. I've spoken to her in a different iteration, but I did want to speak to her about the political party and also serving as an MEC. If I'm correct, she's the only one from her party that's in government, and not just in Gauteng, but I think broadly speaking, that's serving in government at the moment. Welcome to EWN's Politics Podcast.
Thank you, Tshidi. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and hello to your listeners.
Yeah, thank you for taking up our offer of our invite. I want to start with a few of the topical issues just to get them out of the way, because I know you're a Joburg girlie. You're born in Hillbrow. Mm-hmm. I want to speak to you about. I want your thoughts about driving through Joburg.
Yeah.
So I'm not speaking to you about government. I'm not speaking to you about Mzansi. Just as a human being who resides in the city, who was born of the city. When you drive around and you look around you, what comes to mind? What do you think?
Yeah, so as you've correctly said, I'm born and bred Joburg native. I have watched this city and I've watched this province go through its ebbs and flows. And, from the very early stages of the initial capital flight in the early 90s, which really started the decay of the inner CBD, Joburg CBD, one saw that. I was living in Hillbrow at the time, like you've said. There was a visible disinvestment in the CBD at that point. There was a moment around kind of the mid-2000s, 2008, where that started to look like it was turning around. Investment was now flowing back into the CBD, property development and all kinds of others. That's where you saw your Mabonengs coming up and Braamfontein starting to happen again. I think Parks was also busy building bicycle lanes and stuff at that time.
So I remember those.
There was certainly
Heben Mashaba came along and very quickly removed those. I remember those.
Yeah. So there was, so we've gone through those cycles, and I think everybody who is from Johannesburg, who's from Gauteng, lives in this perpetual hope that we will one day be able to get back to being, the jewel of South Africa, the jewel of the African continent. And it's unfortunate to see the decay that has set in all quarters, in all sides of the city, in all sides of the province, from infrastructure that is dilapidated, just seeing even the basics just not functioning, whether it's through traffic lights that often are not functioning, and us accepting what should be really abnormal as normal. People joke often about the guys who then start directing traffic where there should be working traffic lights. That is not normal, but we find ourselves normalizing the abnormal just to get by. Even the simple things, cutting the grass on the side of the roads, taking the weeds out. So I do, we see all of that. And equally, by the way, Johannesburg has also undergone a lot of development and change over time. We have improved. There's been improvements in highway and road infrastructure. So it is bittersweet. And I think that we do have an opportunity to turn things around still. But we are definitely at a turning point. And I think if we don't arrest the decay now and treat it with some urgency, we are going to find ourselves in trouble.
It's so weird. Lately, these past few days, I've seen traffic lights working where I haven't seen traffic lights working for years in Joburg. And it's almost an irritation that now they're working. I'm like, now you're wasting my time. Now I must wait for the light to go green. And then I think about the homeless guys who usually help out with the traffic lights. And I think, oh no, those people are more efficient. But I there's a thing. It's interesting that you believe that there's still some hope. I'm not sure. Do you have hope in the government of national unity as it stands, that it is something that will reach the end of its term of office?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of a two-part question. I mean, when it comes to the city and the turnaround of the city and why I remain hopeful. One, I mean, as you'll know, Government of National Unity is a national government level agreement. I still think at a local level, I think the dynamics of local government are very different, number one. But number two, I believe that there's a lot of learnings that we now have from the Government of National Unity that will inform the coalition agreements that will emerge come 2026, because we must accept that we are in coalition territory. That is where we are now as a country.
No question. Sorry, I think I confused you there. I was segueing away from local government altogether.
Okay, no,
I want
fine.
to know about the issue of hope in and of itself.
Okay.
I want to know about your thoughts regarding what we see in the GNU.
Sure.
You are in the GNU as a political party. Do you have hope that this is something that will stand? We've been watching it over the past few days, weeks, and hey, it's on the brink. Here, there's so many things about what will be, what will come of it. I think tempers have certainly cooled at this point in time in the GNU.
So, look, I think there have been a lot of learnings in the last 9 months from all parties within the GNU. And I really want to say this quite plainly. The GNU is not the DA. And it's not just the DA and the ANC, because there's a tendency to paint the entire GNU with the whims and the feelings of the DA at any particular moment. It is not a fact that the entire GNU is a function of how the DA feels about its place in the GNU at any given point in time. In fact, there have been a lot of successful stories, and there's been a lot of actual good stories to come out of the GNU from many of the other parties, and I won't go through them one by one, but I think by and large, the parties in the GNU are committed to turning around, government, turning around some of the governance failures that we've all seen and experienced. They are working hard in their various portfolios, no matter where they be sitting. I mean, as you know, Rise Mzansi at a national level is not in the executive, but we are in SCOPA, and our national leader chairs SCOPA and is doing an excellent job of actually holding public institutions to account and overseeing the work of reviewing the public expenditure and ensuring that we stop wasting public funds. And that's a critical factor that would not have been achieved had we not been part of the GNU. You also see a lot of work being done to try and turn around local municipalities, and the COGTA portfolio is leading that through Minister Tlhabisa from the IFP. So I'm saying there's a lot of good stories to tell, and I think we shouldn't find ourselves in a constant state of managing the feelings of one party. That being said, I believe the road ahead is going to require superior levels of political maturity and a willingness on all sides, both within the ANC and the DA, as the largest parties in the GNU, to co-govern and to power share. There is no party that receives in an absolute majority, and I believe there's a lot of work to be done on all sides, on the sides of both of those parties, in recognizing where we are right now and where we find ourselves. So that being said, I think there still is a lot of hope for the GNU, but it does require the parties in the GNU to reconfigure themselves and to reset, let me say, the current relationship and dynamic inside the GNU.
I'll come back to the issue of power sharing it a little bit later. The issue of budget, the current impasse.
Yeah.
What does Rise Mzansi want to see?
Yeah. So we've been very consistent in our position from the start. We were, like many other parties, opposed to, further burdening the citizens with what I would call the sins of our previous dispensation. And what do I mean by that? I'm saying we shouldn't be paying for corruption. We shouldn't be paying for public wasting of public funds that has happened over the last decade. And so we were opposed to anything where we would, whether it's VAT, the VAT increase, as well as the increases or the proposed increases around personal income tax. We were very clear we didn't want to see any of that. However, we were also very clear that there were certain things we did want to see. We wanted to see, for example, a further investment into rail infrastructure, particularly signaling infrastructure. And that's what we were voting for. We said we want to move some of these issues forward. And so when we supported the fiscal framework, we did so because we said we cannot reduce an entire 2.6 trillion rand budget down to one 13.5 billion rand line item. There are many other things that government has to be able to proceed with and have certainty on. One of them, as I said, being the rail infrastructure, the investments that are being made into water infrastructure. That's about 156 billion rand that has been identified and planned for in the current fiscal framework. We're also talking about employing unemployed doctors. We've been crying for the last few years about unemployed doctors, and now there is more budget being allocated towards employing doctors. And of course, there's many other elements that we wanted to see moving ahead, and we were very clear that we don't support the VAT increase, but we will support the fiscal framework and work for the next few weeks to identify where we can then raise the necessary revenue to close that gap. And that's where we find ourselves right now. So we've engaged with the ANC, we've engaged with even other parties within the GNU to say, how do we then close that 13.5 billion rand gap, because that's ultimately what we're solving for. And we've been able to then, make some suggestions to that effect directly to the ANC. But I can see there's also a number of other parties that have also made such inputs. And I'm quite confident, and we're quite confident as Rise Mzansi, that the specific issue around VAT and the impasse around VAT will be resolved. And fortunately, it will not come at the expense of a complete, halting of every other thing that government has to do.
You said fortunately or unfortunately? Fortunately?
No, I said
fortunately
I'm saying
it will not.
I'm saying it will be resolved.
It will be resolved,
in
but
that,
not,
and it will not require us to completely collapse government
in order
to
get
make
there.
sure that it gets resolved.
So some pain in order to get to where we are going. Is that what it is?
Yeah. So our view, in short, is that the VAT increase is a temporary increase. We know that it's temporary because it's effectively already, the wheels are already in motion. Yep. But that is what we had already known. We said we were going into this understanding that we are approving this fiscal framework, but working in the background to solve that issue so that we can then formally reverse that VAT increase. And so that is the process that is underway. It is unconventional, as it's unprecedented, let me say,
that is.
For our democracy. But it being unprecedented doesn't mean it's not possible, and it doesn't mean it can't be done. And it is being done.
If it does happen, let's go ahead and see a reversal of that. What ought to happen to the finance minister? Because suddenly there are questions about the finance minister, with some saying that if there's a way around VAT that he couldn't see, that could be found within the budget, then he's not fit for purpose. Would you share that view? Is it then a question of, Kondongwana should consider resigning?
No, look, I think what we must accept is that the budget is an outward expression of, let me say, political priorities. In this case, a political compromise between different parties. I think where we have missed the boat, and where the finance minister in particular missed the boat in the process, is that there was an assumption that it's business as usual. And I think the wake-up call that we've all gotten as a country is that it cannot be, because the budget is the ultimate expression of what government's priority and program of action is. And that needs to be the outcome of a political negotiation and a political compromise. And so my sense is that the work that is being done now between all the parties is to then give input into what we believe should be prioritized and what we believe should maybe be deprioritized, which then kicks out the final number, for lack of a better word. And we all have different, you will see if you've looked at some of the different proposals, everyone has different ideas of where that money should come from,
absolutely.
Or how much can be raised, or whether it should come from expenditure cuts, or whether it should come from raising revenue from UIF, from here and there. That is part of the political process that I believe must happen, but has not ordinarily happened. And I do think it will inform the process going forward. Do I think we should be calling for his head? Not necessarily. But I do think that what we have to now take on from this moment is to review the process by which we arrive at that final moment of actual tabling the budget. It cannot be a unilateral decision of one individual or one ministry in government. It has to be the outcome of a political compromise.
I think one of the big conversations around this budget impasse has been the amount of power that lies with the finance minister, that actually this process has to be more consultative. I want to almost get into the GNU, I'm going back into the GNU space and consultations as well. You spoke about the importance of these conversations. Part of the criticism I've heard is that the ANC is bilaterals with everybody. So you're not finding people in a room collectively as GNU partners making decisions about the way forward. When the statement of intent was signed, one of the agreements was a policy lekgotla. I've never seen it. I know that they established a clearinghouse. I have questions about the functionality of it all, because in my head, the clearinghouse deals with issues always after the fact. The issue arises in government, there's a clash, then it goes to the clearinghouse where there's already hardened attitudes about dealing with a particular issue. So for me, that's a little bit upside down. What needs to happen in how parties relate to one another?
Yeah.
And ultimately give rise to the idea of power sharing in a proper sense, if you may.
Absolutely, Tshidi. This point you're raising is one that we actually raised and we were quite vocal about in our direct engagements with the ANC when we met with them. You are correct in saying that as it stands right now, the GNU is a series of bilateral agreements between different parties and the ANC, and the DSG confirmed it as such, on another public platform, effectively saying that, the GNU is not vulnerable to one party. Should someone leave, the others are still in force. So that may have been convenient at the time, and we must accept that we only had 15 days to negotiate that initial agreement. And so there was more emphasis put on trying to get to the end rather than maybe working through all of the details. With the benefit of hindsight and the 9 months that we now have of understanding where the shortcomings are, we believe that it is indeed time to reset that agreement. And resetting means, like you're saying, creating or having an agreement that actually binds all of the members of the GNU to each other, not just to the ANC. Call it a coalition agreement or whatever you want to call it. But essentially where we are right now is that between ourselves and the IFP, Rise Mzansi and the IFP, Rise Mzansi and the DA, we have no agreement with each other. So I can wake up today and I can completely trash talk the IFP and the IFP's governance without having regard for the fact that we are actually co-governing as it stands. So we believe that the governance framework of the GNU must be strengthened. There has to be some agreement that also governs the behavior of the members of the GNU towards each other, and then the GNU as a government of national unity needs to be able to take positions and communicate in a unified fashion. One of the things I'm sure you've seen and experienced is the fact that you'll get statements, for example, from the ANC, you'll get statements from Rise, statements from DA, from Mang, but there's never been a moment where there's a communication that comes from the GNU saying this is the GNU's position. And we feel that that's a major shortcoming, and it's a function of not having a unified program of action or a unified policy platform, as you've correctly raised. So we think there's a number of things that have to be resolved there, and that must happen sooner rather than later if we are going to be able to guarantee the stability of the GNU.
The Bantu Holomis was here a few weeks ago. One of his complaints is the DA doesn't speak to smaller parties. It just wants to be the friends with the ANC. In fact, Zibi said it to my colleague, Bongani Ping 1702 as well, that the problem is that the DA's only friend is the ANC, and now they're not getting along.
Yeah.
But I then went to the DA and I said, this is an issue that everybody keeps to be flagging, is you're not willing to engage with others. And literally the response I got from some members of the DA is they're small parties, they're inconsequential, they just nod their heads, they're just happy to be there or happy to praise Cyril, they're not happy to do anything. So there's also that thing where they're like, they carry no weight.
Yeah.
And that you can't compare their 1-2 seats to our 80-odd seats.
Yeah.
There's also that hunyatsana. It's actually the best way to describe it.
100%.
That is part and parcel of the problem. How in your head do you navigate that, where the vision that you have for how the GNU will function requires that you're able to actually see the value in each other at the table?
No, 100%, Tshidi. And a big contributor, let me say, to the perceived instability of the GNU is not a function of the numbers and the numerical majority that the GNU holds. It's a function of the fact that there is, at a relational level, there are parties, or a party in particular, that is just not willing or able to afford other parties the necessary respect that you would need to be able to co-govern with people. And I think that that's a really core part of what is missing. And this is why our emphasis is not just on a coalition agreement, but actually saying we need to actually have an agreement that codifies what we understand to be acceptable behavior from parties that are in the GNU. And I say this because it's critical. I mean, if you look at a company, you cannot have a scenario where the chairperson of the board and the audit committee chair and the CEO are going at each other every 5 minutes in the newspapers and the public domain. That would completely spook the shareholders, and they would most likely withdraw their investments from that company. It is a necessary part of being able to lead either an institution or an organization or a government, that there needs to be some kind of unified program and unified voice. Now, the unwillingness, and like you say, that thing yaonyatsana, is a problem. If people cannot, at a base level, afford the people they co-govern with that modicum of respect, it makes it very difficult to actually deal now with the difficult issues. And you spoke about the clearinghouse, for example. The clearinghouse, indeed, is a mechanism to help unlock some of those blockages. But unfortunately, like you say, it tends to be the last point, when a lot of these issues wouldn't even reach there if there was just proper communication and some kind of upfront checking around the table, what is your sense of such, and you may find, and this is the irony of it all, you may find that there's a lot of parties inside the GNU who would actually agree with a lot of the positions that the DA takes. But because they deem themselves too high and mighty to actually engage with anybody else, it creates then a difficulty with communication. However, that being said, as I'm going back to the beginning of what I was saying, I don't think our job as the GNU is to, dance around the DA and make the DA happy and comfortable. They've made a choice to be in government. What they need to do is resolve their internal conflict about whether they want to be an opposition party or whether they want to be in government. Being in government means you need to be able to take the good with the bad. You need to be able, to work with the people that you're governing with, and you need to be able to defend the decisions and positions of government, domestically and internationally, because you are part of it. You cannot have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I always make the example, it's like being in a marriage. You can't, every time you have a disagreement, those of us who are married or in relationships, you can't, every time you have a disagreement, threaten, start packing your bags and leaving. Imagine now, every time someone doesn't wash the dishes,
because it's my modus operandi.
You see, now that's a problem.
Doesn't work.
Let me give you some relationship counseling. It doesn't work. And if you're going to be that person who's packing their bags every time you have a disagreement, that one day you're going to come, you're going to threaten, and the person's going to say, okay, tsamaya.
Yes.
And that door's going to close and it's not going to open again. And there's only so many times you can play that card before it backfires on you.
You get dismissed a lot as just a shrill, a cheerleader, an ANC light as a political party. It happens quite a lot when you raise each of the risings. They go, it's just a shrill for the ANC.
Yeah,
you're aware of that, Mos?
Yeah, no. Well, I think it's a very convenient and simplistic framing. I think it's convenient for some to dismiss Mzansi in that way, and I think it. We have been fortunate actually in the way that in the roles that we have within the GNU, in that both at a national level and at a provincial level, that we actually are able to make what I'd say is quite an outsized impact, given what you spoke about in terms of our electoral outcome. We have 1 seat in the Gauteng province. With that 1 seat, we occupy a cabinet position. We have a portfolio. We sit as part of the ExCo, and we are effectively co-governing in Gauteng. Does that mean we have a veto vote on everything? No, of course not. But what it means is that we have an ability to make direct input every single day into how this province is run, and at the very least within the portfolio that I lead, you are able to execute on certain mandates and programs. And at a national level, like I said, the chairpersonship of SCOPA is a very important and critical role to the functioning of Parliament, not just to the GNU, to the functioning of Parliament and therefore the functioning of our democracy. And the quality of leaders that we have been able to put forward has substantially enhanced the discourse in government as well as the quality of governance. And I can say that with my chest, because the leader of Rise Mzansi, in his role as a chairperson of SCOPA, has completely elevated that position and really been able to elevate the work of Parliament. And I think it's the same for our other public reps. So my point is that those who want to dismiss us do so at their own peril. Rise Mzansi is growing. We are building. We are celebrating our 2-year anniversary actually at the end of this week. And for a party that has only been in existence for 2 years, I'd say we've done exceptionally well and we're punching well above our weight.
I've said on the record, I've tweeted it. I do think Songezo Zibi is interesting in this iteration of his life. But there are many people that I think are interesting in Parliament. I think Vuyiswa is somebody that I'd wished, even going to the elections, that enough votes to make sure he returns to Parliament. So I was pleased to see that happen. But when I look at Songezo at Scope, I think of Themba Godi, APC. And APC makes me think of Rise Mzansi because I go, yes.
How?
Themba was...
Hi, Bo.
That Hi Ganjani was quite quick. I'll explain. Because when I think about Themba Godi, he was actually quite effective at Scopa as well. But he was so focused on Scopa that there was nothing happening with the party. Rise Mzansi is interesting in the same way, to a large degree. You focused a lot of your energies on the spaces that you feel as far as being public reps are concerned and serving is concerned. That many people question, well, not many, some of us who are watching question how much effort is now being put into the groundwork. Because when you came into the scene 2 years ago, a lot of work was being done in the build-up, and we'll touch on Rivonia Circle, but a lot of groundwork and going to communities, rural communities, was part and parcel of what you're doing. It feels like there's a greater effort, a greater concentration on the responsibilities you've been given, which is an understandable thing. But that's also how Themba Godi failed to return to Parliament. He got swallowed, because you actually need to nurture the other side too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, and this is not a comment on any other party or Themba Godi or anyone, but the fortunate thing about Rise Mzansi is that we are not a one-man band. We actually have depth of talent and leadership capacity across the organization, and not everyone is in public leadership roles. We have a number of, if you look at our National Leadership Collective, it's made up of 21 leaders who occupy different roles in society and help to keep the work on the ground, warm. But that being said, it's also important to note that the purpose of contesting an election and running an election campaign is to be given a mandate to govern. That is what people elected us for. They did not elect us so that we can continue campaigning the day after elections. So there has had to be, let me say, a shift in what we occupy ourselves with on a daily basis, in that once we receive a mandate to govern, the work that we are mandated to do is to go and actually be successful in those roles. We also have the party that continues to do its work. And you will see there are campaigns that are being run, even though we're not represented in any local council at this point in time. But we are running campaigns at a local government level, dealing with local government issues, be it the water challenges, the infrastructure challenges, etc. And that has been happening in and around Johannesburg and Gauteng largely, as well as in the Western Cape. But So the organization continues to run, but what we are mandated to do is to go out and deliver on the promises we made to the people of South Africa during the campaign. We promised certain things. They elected us. We must now go do them. And what we will see, though, I think, as we get closer to the local elections, is now a reigniting, let me say. And it's not just us. It's all parties will then, probably shift gear, and you'll start to see a lot more of that work that's being done on the ground. But it certainly hasn't stopped. We are very busy. As I said, we're celebrating our 2-year anniversary at the end of this week, and there's a whole program of activities that are planned across the country in all of our various structures, and I think you'll be seeing more of that.
So I suppose it's a time issue. There was a time where you were campaigning in the lead up to the 2024 elections, and I think the video still gets used from time to time. I think you're in the Joburg CBD. This is what democracy looks like.
Yes.
You're chanting it up and down the streets, and there was a thing about where some people were genuinely amused at how different, supposedly, the campaigning was. When you look back at how this country understands Rise Mzansi, then versus now, I don't know if there's been an evolution in your eyes.
Well, I think we still have a lot of work to do. To really get our message across and to make people understand what we're about. And I think it's fair. It's fair that a lot of people are still trying to make sense of us. We arrived as new kids on the block. We did not have any big brand name, well-known political leaders.
Not political, but definitely known and influential.
Yes, but absolutely. I'm saying we didn't have a Zuma or somebody who has a large constituency who's been in politics for 100 years.
And some would say your song is a CV who comes from the media and the media's buy-in. I mean, we have to talk about it.
I mean, I love you. I love you guys, but you guys overrate yourselves. You are not as well known as you think you are. You are not as well known, you media people.
No, we're not as well known, but we're definitely influential. But we must also recognize that.
Yeah, no, sure. And look, we had a lot of business leaders as well, and people who had been in the political sphere. But I'm just saying, what matters, people follow people. If you take somebody who's a well-known, popular politician,
people who are known,
and you dress them in a different T-shirt, they leave with their base. We've seen even a lot of parties that have come about in the last 20 years have been breakaways, either breakaways of the ANC or big breakaways of the DA or whatever, and they've been able to leave with entire branches and structures. And so they may be starting from new, but they are starting from new with a lot of seed capital from where they come from, if you know what I mean. We didn't have that benefit. We were trying to really introduce new leaders into the space, myself included. I didn't come from a political background. But number two, we were also trying to introduce and have a new way of politicking. And I'm still very committed to that, because we believe that the way that politics has been done has actually, unfortunately, alienated a lot more people than it has been successful in bringing people into the fold. You have politics on one side of society and everything else happening on the other side. And we think that those worlds need to come closer to each other, and it requires a rethinking of how we do politics. It requires perhaps electoral reform. It requires us thinking about how we organize. Tshidi, I don't know where you live, but I don't know if you've ever been involved in a door-to-door in your neighborhood, or if people come to your house to do door-to-door and sign you up for membership of a political party. I don't have that in my neighborhood. So the question we must ask is, how does somebody who lives in my neighborhood touch and feel and experience politics outside of just being on social media? And it maybe requires us to rethink how we are doing politics. It maybe needs to be more about civic action. It needs to align and feel more like the stuff we are doing on a daily basis, So, and I think we've given ourselves, because we are new, because we are largely made up of a lot of young people, we've given ourselves the room to reimagine what South African politics could look like in the next 30 years. And we're not beholden to Congress-style politics or a certain brand of politics that has come to define us in our democracy.
And I think to a degree, maybe that is what we need, a severing in how we approach and think about politics. I am still thinking about what we ought to do and ought to be as a country. The fragmentation of small parties, to a large degree, in my eyes, is part of the problem. in your head, will there be a point of coming together? We always hear stories about an umbrella of Action SA, where Rise Mzansi might go there, might not go there. Are parties of these smaller parties leaders rather of these smaller parties thinking about what it takes to come together and what that means? So putting together your resources to reach a greater base, and is the pathway possibly Action SA?
So discussions have already started around what a possible working together or working relationship could look like. It's not, as you define it, it's not coming into Action SA. It's actually about saying, what would a broad coalition look like that could incorporate existing parties, but also perhaps individuals who have been able to contribute to politics, but maybe are no longer active. There's a lot of people that have fallen out of what I'd say party politics, but are still interested and able to contribute. So our sense is that it's not about folding into one party. It's about the forming of some kind of a broad umbrella formation.
A broad church vibe.
An umbrella formation that can accommodate a lot of different parties and individuals who have a shared political perspective. You'll know, for example, Rise Mzansi positions itself as a social democratic party. We're grounded in constitutional democratic principles, and we have a certain vision that we'd like to see the country achieving. And I think there are a number of other parties that share those views. So we are having those discussions. We've had extensive discussions with parties. And I don't need to name them, but I think it's you can deduce.
You can name them. But doesn't the Moonshot Pact's idea tell you that there is no appetite almost to go in that direction? I recognize that being youthful and trying to reimagine politics anew is a wonderful idea, but when you see attempts like the Moonshot Pact, when you see those ideas falling flat on their faces, does that not communicate something about the electorate in this country?
No, not necessarily. I think the multi-party charter, or the Moonshot Pact as you refer to it, was started under very different conditions, and as an agreement it functioned very differently. And perhaps one might argue that the spirit even in which it was entered into may not have been 100% in good faith. I think some of the other members of the multi-party charter had said so. We were not part of the multi-party charter for many of those reasons. We saw the risks associated with it. You can't have parties, for example, that are on one hand contesting each other for the same electorate, but claiming to be working together, because at the end of the day, you come out with what you come out with in an election. So we've certainly looked at some of those shortcomings, and in the discussions we've had, we've been quite explicit that, should there be a view to working together, we need to be 2 feet in as parties, and we need to actually try and look towards establishing a new entity under which all of us as parties can contest. But it's still very early stages of the discussions. And I think, but broadly there has been a sense that consolidation and unity is more favorable than, us being a number of different small parties together.
What's the pathway? How long would that take for you all to reach a point where you're ready to contest, supposedly as one unit?
Well,
how far along are these talks? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Look, the talks have been kind of ongoing since the elections, actually. So I don't foresee it going, much longer than kind of the middle of this year. It doesn't need to. It's either we're in or we're out, And at this point, I think we've had enough time to assess, even from a GNU perspective, from where the country's broadly going. So my sense is that we're closer than we would perhaps like to believe we are. But again, it's, as I'm saying, we believe, and the other parties we've engaged with believe, that we are really stronger together. What that will look like mechanically is probably what we still need to iron out.
Roger Jardine attempted to launch a political party in the lead up, very last minute bid, in the lead up to the elections in 2024. His party, in part, was rejected because it was seen as business putting its hand and its hand in the politics and trying to determine the direction that politics should go in. In part, that's the criticism that's often labeled against Rise Mzansi. When you ask people about Rise Mzansi, they go, yeah, but business dictated that thing. That's a product of business that's trying to tell us where to go. That's why it doesn't deserve to have credibility amongst its people. You haven't been able to, from where I stand, shake off that idea. Be it true or not, it's something that people attach to you.
Sure. And I mean, I think going to the point that I made earlier, we do need to do a lot of work in making people really understand what we are about, what we stand for, because outside of that, people will arrive and arrive at their own conclusions. Unfortunately, the current, let me say, political landscape in South Africa has been split into, certain camps, and people understand the politics in that way from those lenses. So the work that we have to do is to really demonstrate through our work that we are now doing in government, through the work that we're doing, politically. And as we work and build up that track record, I think people will start to actually have something tangible to hold on to, rather than making assumptions. We have also at several moments, taken policy positions that are quote unquote not pro what business, you would expect, supposedly, capital or business to be taking. And I think enough of those moments will give people an opportunity, those who are sincere in their analysis, because there's a lot of people who just also want to spread fake news, but those who are sincerely trying to understand and who are listening to understand, will and should judge us on our actions, not on what is supposedly said about us.
Rise Mzansi never gave a clear explanation of its relationship with Rivonia Circle. We understood that one was a conduit for the other. There was an issue around money that was donated either to Rivonia Circle and how it found its way or not found its way to... Look at her face. I hope you realize that the cameras are on as you make faces.
I'm shook
at this. But those claims have always been there. People have always made questions. While you think about that, I want you to also reflect on the fact that then Rivonia Circle had very well-known faces who were analysts, who were weighing in on particular political parties, yet they were being seen to be associated with Rivonia, which is associated with Rise Mzansi, so that will be a position. But they'll be on our platforms. Lukon Amguni, somebody we speak to quite often, who's associated with associated with Rivonia Circle, but would be seen at... So that those contradictions, I don't think were fully ever clarified in the public domain. The issue around money, in essence, ended up with people claiming that what it felt like to them, I think some even labeled it money laundering, if you look at it broadly, like the way this is actually unfolded. Just those issues, that lack of clarity around the relationship between the two, because how people also saw the two was the IRR and the DA. I'm sure you've heard that. It's not unique to you at all.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there was a lot of attempts at having a gotcha moment. Every week people were like, we gotcha, such and such. But there's never been any equivocation about what the relationship is. Rivonia Circle and Rise Mzansi have and continue to be two completely separate entities. One preceded the other, and indeed, as a think tank, gave rise to the idea that a new political vehicle must exist. It is 2 years later. There are people who are leading and involved in Rivonia Circle who are quite obviously not in Rise Mzansi. We are not, as in we have a leadership that is visible to everybody. And so my point is, this idea that you can't have what I'd call... if you look globally in other markets, you've got what we refer to as political ecosystems. You may have organizations, be it civil society organizations, think tanks, interest groups that share a similar political perspective or aspirations, but recognize that different vehicles need to do different things. The work of Rivonia Circle reached a point where it said there needs to be a political vehicle. That is the finding. Somebody must then say, what do we do with that finding? Now, what then happened, as you know, the chairperson resigned from Rivonia Circle and went to take that vision forward with a completely new cohort of people who then started a political party. There's absolutely nothing unknown or untoward about this. So I think it's just unfamiliar, once again, to us in South Africa, that we have what I'd say publicly disclosed political ecosystems and organizations that represent, let me say, a similar aspiration, but understand that we need to work on this project and the political project in different ways and from different quarters. We do not influence Rivonia Circle's policies, their programs, their expenditure in any shape or form. I myself have never been part of Rivonia Circle, as you know. So I think all of this is somewhat unfounded, and it's again people trying to make sense of what this is because it's not familiar to them and because they don't know us and maybe they don't know what even brought us to this point. One day, Tshidi, when we have time, we will sit, you and I, and I'll tell you the story of how I personally got to this point and what brought me here. And I can assure you there's really nothing untoward within that story.
Does Rivonia Circle still provide Mzansi with research and because you said the work that was done led to obviously the rise. So I imagine if the think tank is still operating, its findings are still something that they share with your party?
Rivonia Circle is a think tank that provides research to all entities. A number of different parties, a number of different organizations use the information and the data, the findings, to do whatever they want to do with it. So their findings are open to all. All I'm saying is that the outcomes, how Rise Mzansi interpreted that, resulted in then, this
the
party
birth of
being
this political
formed.
Party.
And really the depth of understanding of what the political problem was. And the work of Rivonia Circle must continue, because we do need progressive think tanks that can do the heavy lifting work. Unfortunately, what we've had, if you look at South Africa over time, what we've had is that the ANC over time has unfortunately absorbed a lot of those entities. So what used to be a very robust, independent civil society, they kind of have an approach towards swallowing. And you'll find a lot of people ending up getting absorbed into government or into the ANC itself. And I'm saying, we don't want that. We don't want that. We believe that there must be a robust and independent civil society, but that the heavy lifting work of thinking through the complex challenges in society must reside somewhere. And then our work is to be able to say, how do we translate that and give political expression to some of those things? And some of it may be taken on by us, some of it may be taken on board by other parties. There's no such formal agreement between us and Rivonia Circle.
This might feel a little bit haphazard, but just speaking about the ANC, so there's a view that it tends to swallow smaller parties. You don't fear that will happen to your party at all?
Well, it's something that, with the benefit of hindsight and having had the opportunity and now awareness of this, we're very mindful of. So we also recognize, though, that it's important for us to be in the room and to be in the ring. We, unlike some parties took a kind of, approach of saying, we don't want anything to do with government or with the ANC. We want to sit outside. We said we want to get stuck into the work of actually understanding the machinery of government. And that is why we have chosen to actually be within the GNU and to be within government. But what our work here is to actually now build that track record of governance whilst we are doing the work of building our base and growing Rise Mzansi over time. And I am very much of the view that 30 years from now, we are not going to be talking about the ANC. I think the ANC will be long behind us by then. But we can't wait till then to build the future political organization that will house all of our aspirations. And that's where we see ourselves as Rise Mzansi, as saying we are now starting the journey towards South Africa's new political dispensation that is outside of the battles of white versus black, DA versus ANC. Like, we're not there. We want to think about the next 30 years and what the new political contract and balance looks like in this country.
You're part of a minority government in Gauteng. There were concerns about stability. We don't see a lot of you manage to keep your issues in house. That's the best way to describe
Okay.
it. There's a lot
Which
of,
is true, we do.
No, there'll be issues. There's no way they wouldn't be, but you manage to keep them away from spilling over quite a lot. From where you stand, what lessons can be learned from the GPU? No, it's not a GPU. From the minority government in Gauteng.
GPU.
But also from the minority, it's a minority government for the ANC. Fine, let's call it GPU. But what lessons can be learned from Gauteng? Because part of the conversation around the ANC is whether or not it can afford to go into minority government at national level.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think Gauteng proves actually a lot of what we've been saying, in that this is not purely a numbers game. There's certain things, yes, you can win with bulldozing your way through with the numbers, but a lot of it requires consensus seeking and a form of leadership that centers actually the work that has to be done and the work of governance. This is not about us and our egos. We have 4 different parties that are in government in Gauteng. So it is a government of provincial unity. Between the PA, the IFP, Mzansi, and the ANC, you have very different parties there. And you've got very different, manifestos, policy priorities, etc. We have decided that we are going to work together to drive a unified program of action. We won't always all get what we want. That is a fact. But we have enough, platforms for consultation that enable us to reach that point of relative consensus. And we really try to, and we've decided that, stability is key. So I think in terms of learnings, that is the learning. The learning is that it boils down to the willingness of the parties around the table to co-govern, to power share, and to treat each other with respect and work together and put the citizens first. That's what this should be about. And it's unfortunate that often it's more about, scoring points with our individual constituencies than actually serving the broader mandate. Once you are in government, as I said, Tshidi, you are not just in government for the people that voted for you. If I was in government only for the people that voted for me, I wouldn't be doing very much. I have to go out and do work and deliver services and provide for many millions of people who did not vote for me. And the success of my success is unfortunately connected also to the success of Gauteng. But that is the choice that we've had to make, and we bring our all to that fight every day. Is it going to be perfect? No, of course it's not. But I believe that through thorough consultation and just operating in good faith, you can get through a lot of the issues.
Food insecurity is something that we often kind of write. You look after agriculture, of course. We kind of look at food insecurity almost as if it's a theoretical thing, that it's removed from us. Yeah. Yet we live in a country where if you look at headlines, sometimes we'll hear of a mother who's made a decision to die by suicide and to take her kids with her because they're too hungry and because of poverty. We still read about children who have no food on the plate. There's an issue around food, ultimately. You're the person who's helping with agriculture and trying to help as far as food security is concerned, and you're doing that in a very difficult climate with the US and with tariffs and with the conversations around farmers and agriculture in our country. I want to try and dissect a bits and bobs of those issues. Let's speak about first the issue of food security in and of itself. How food secure is this province?
Well, as you know, Tshidi, this is an issue that I've been particularly very vocal about, but actually which Mzansi has consistently been raising, even throughout our election campaign. So this is an extension, really, of an issue that we feel is important and must be elevated to national level. Because what we are dealing with at a national level is over 9 million people who are classified as food insecure. In other words, they are not guaranteed a meal a day. They don't know where their next meal will come from. At a Gauteng level, in terms of Gauteng, we're not far better than that. In fact, we sit with about 28% of residents of Gauteng who are on various levels of the spectrum of food insecurity. But it's a sizable amount. It's almost a third of residents of Gauteng, and that is even worse, and it's more pronounced in children under the age of 6, which is absolutely heartbreaking, because those children don't go to school, so they often don't have access to like the school nutrition programs, and they're highly reliant, on the household income level and poverty in the household, which we know. Even the grants and various social support programs that are provided are not nearly enough to provide what is needed from a full nutritious basket of food. So we do have a challenge, but it's a strange challenge because, as you've said, we are a net exporter of food. So in terms of our agricultural exports, and even in terms of how sophisticated South Africa's food production industry is, we are actually way up there, with many other developed countries, but we do have this domestic challenge of not getting the food to where it needs to go. So this is something that we've really now started to turn the volume up on, and we're working with a number of organizations in this space. One of the issues that's been highlighted is the massive levels of food waste that exist. I mean, we are wasting close to 10 million tons of food a year, which is more than enough, by the way, to feed the 9 million people that I spoke about every single day. And it's a function of just inefficient food systems, whether it's through the commercial farmers, and their production, as well as the retailers themselves. And basically the food that's being produced is not getting to where it needs to go. So we're taking on the issue of food waste very seriously, and actually wanting to drive and push for some legislative change and some strengthening around food waste legislation. But it's obviously not just about food waste. There's a whole lot to discuss even around food production, and how we can produce more efficiently, support small-scale farmers so that we can localize food production, and support livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods at a local level.
The issue of this U.S. tariff war, yes, it's kind of on pause at the moment. You never know for how long. What does that do to your farmers in the province? Are there fears? Is there confusion? Because not only is it about the tariff war that Trump has taken on, but it's also an issue about where the politics of this country and where it comes from have trickled into the agriculture space because of this back and forth around farmers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, we can't underestimate or underplay the relevance of the US market as one of our key export markets. But what I think we must also recognize, it's not our only export market. We actually do, from a Gauteng perspective, the bulk of our exports are within the SADC region. And that's actually our strongest trading partner. There's actually other countries in the SADC region. The EU is a very big trading partner for us, as well as China. And I'm not saying that, that anyone doesn't matter or the US doesn't matter, but I'm saying we mustn't forget that we are not a single market economy. And as strenuous as the situation can be, I think it's very prudent for us now as South Africa to start exploring how we can, let me say, shore up our relationships really with other markets and ensure that we don't completely put our agricultural industry at risk with the current fluctuations that are happening. But as I'm saying, from a Gauteng perspective, I think there's a lot of opportunity just because Gauteng is so well placed domestically, but also in the African continent, in an African context. There's the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that provides a lot of opportunity for us to export into the continent, both and largely that's more on the agro-processing side. So value-added products, which are fantastic because actually that enables us to create more jobs and operate in a higher segment of the value chain rather than just raw agricultural products. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity. I like many in the industry, quietly, or let me say, I'm hopeful that we can find some resolution to the challenges that we are having with the US right now. But I think fortunately South Africa doesn't have all its eggs in one basket, and we do have other markets that we supply into.
I'm almost done. There's other things to pick at with regards to your government role, but really what I wanted to have was to speak to you as chair of Rise Mzansi more than anything else. This week I saw, was it this week? Tshidi Madia, I know you have an affinity towards Nasipi Moya, and I think other women in the political
Yeah, I was about to
space.
say, I'm here for women and women leaders.
And
Sorry.
we love
Biased.
that. No, that's the chorus. That's that's exactly what it ought to be. She was called Mampara of the Week by one of the Sunday papers, which was really bizarre to me. But she was also getting slammed by so many people. I mean, my understanding as a woman, also a black woman specifically, I always think the line is always moving when it comes to black women and what the expectations are. Helen Ziller is problematic for people. Nomvula Mokonyane. Women are always seen as an issue, particularly in the political space. When you saw that, her being labeled Mampara of the Week, like what comes to mind? And I think maybe this is my last question to you, really. Also, wrap up of your own experiences, because you don't come from politics, you come from business, and navigating this world, which when you ask me, depending on the day, I say it's absolutely filthy, depending on the day.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is. It's absolutely brutal. And you're right in saying that women do get held to a very different standard, especially in politics, which already politics is combative. Already politics
It's ugly.
is ugly.
You use such nice words for it.
Yeah, but
it's
I
just
mean,
an ugly,
but
filthy
as a woman,
space.
you obviously are held to all kinds of other standards. Your outfits are being examined, your hair, your face, your this. Did you get Botox? Did you not get Botox? So it's like all kinds of other nonsense things that you have to answer to. Obviously, I completely rolled my eyes when I saw that headline. I mean, I don't know if that publication has been watching the news this week, but we have more than enough mamparas to go around.
Way too many.
Way too many. It was just, for me, it really discredits that publication more than it does the person that they named. So, but I think from where I'm sitting, I think that particularly in the era that we're going into, the era of cooperative governance, coalition governance, I actually think this is the time where women leaders need to step up, rise up, and play a more prominent role in senior leadership positions in government. I have been able to find collaboration touch points. I mean, last week alone, we did a schools program with one of the MPs from the EFF. The councillor was from the ANC. In that particular ward that we were in, and I find that we are able to transcend party lines and focus on what matters in the moment, perhaps a lot better than our male counterparts. And I'll say that boldly. And like you say, I mean, I'm the biggest cheerleader for women. Doesn't matter what party you're from. If you're doing well, and you're serving the people that elected you, then fantastic. And there's a lot of incredible women leaders. Nobundu from Bosa is fantastic. Ayanda at the Gauteng level, fantastic. Dr. Moya is fantastic. And there's many others. I mean, even Gogo Helen, I have so much respect for her.
Yes, that's what I mentioned, Helen. Even Helen.
And the amount of
Across the
time
board,
that she has, she's been in the game for a long time. She's been through the seasons of politics, and she's held her own. And I think we South African women have a lot to be proud of in terms of the strides we've made in politics. And we must just shut out the haters and keep rising.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you so much, Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, Chairperson, National Chair of Rise Mzansi. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Politricking
On record, Tshidi.
with Tshidi Madia on EWN.